Hi. Thank you very much. I hope you guys are all settled in after lunch here. First of all, introduce the company. I'll talk a little bit about my background as well here. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Akamon. I'm 34. I'm an American, as you can hear from the accent, but I've settled on this side of the Atlantic. Currently, I'm residing in Barcelona, splitting my time between Barcelona and Tel Aviv, as Akamon has just been integrated with a company that has large operations in Tel Aviv. The background of my career, I started out as a game designer at IGT, which is a very large real money casino land-based company, and I worked there for 7 years as a game designer. Then when I moved over to Europe, I came to a small real money gaming studio for online games called Quickspin, based out of Stockholm. But after a couple of years there, when the second winter started to set in, got a bit cold and dark, and figured that it would be a good move to go to Barcelona. So I've been Chief Product Officer at Akamon for just under 2 years now. So Akamon in Latin America. When Akamon started in a phase of expansion, it had a large market in Spain and also some in France, but the big opportunity, as it was viewed at the time back around 2011 or 2012, was in Latin America, and that was the first big expansion target. And so we have a lot of experience going back to the beginning of social casino in Latin America and have been successful there in a way that not many other operators have been. When we look at this, you can say, well, from the perspective of the very large players, when you look at the revenue breakdown by geography, it's a valid question that you could be asking yourself, can you make a successful social casino company that's focused only on Latin countries? Well, the truth is, for Akamon, we were number 13 globally in social casino at the point when we were acquired by Impress Technologies. We've had stable growth that we've been continuing, and a lot of it is still from Latin America. So I think we have a basis to be able to say that, yes, it is possible to build one. But you need to take a bit of time to start to understand Latin America. So you could be asking yourself here, should I really care about LATAM? Well, if you're here listening to this, presumably you do on some level, because we're not catering it, so you're not here for the food, obviously. One of the first things to look at as well, is Latin America a force? Is it something that's relevant on the global scene for mobile social gaming and social casino in particular? And so you look at Latin America, you think, well, it's a bunch of unstable economies, a couple patches of very nice, clean growth, a couple of patches of sporadic growth with boom and busts, and a bit of difficulty with payment methods, with monetization, etc., unstable governments, problematic economies, etc. So I'd say, yes, you know what Latin America is. Then we say, do we really? If we start looking at the stereotypes that a lot of people have of it, and you don't have to take a picture of this because this isn't fact. This is just the stereotype that a lot of people have looking at Latin America, that you think of Brazil as being beaches and unstable government and problematic economy. I think of Venezuela as being the archetype for Latin America, that it's disastrous leadership there that's led the economy into a lot of problems. Colombia, there's still a stereotype that it's a lot of cocaine, and then when you start looking to the southern cone, it's something that is a bit of a mystery, except for Argentina, which has, you might have heard things in the news about problems with the economy, issues with the government there, etc. Starting to get a bit higher resolution in the stereotypes that we're going to apply to it here, we can say, okay, well, if we start looking country by country, then we can say Colombia has actually become a very good place to do business, that Mexico, it's still an interesting place to be working, and it's a very large economy, larger than some European economies of similar population at this point. We look at Brazil, and it's obviously the best at soccer, and we can start to see that there are a bit of cultural variations within Latin America that might be relevant to take into account as we're looking at product there. So you might be thinking, well, now maybe there's still a bit to learn about Latin America. The first thing to begin to understand is that Latin America gets grouped together because it's generally thought of as a single ethno-linguistic region, but in practice, there are a lot of different smaller regions to it that have very different economies, different ways of doing business, different types of players, and different player preferences. The biggest difference is, of course, between Brazil and the rest of Spanish-speaking Latin America. When you look at Brazil, it's a population in the range of 300 million. When you look at Mexico, it's a population in the range of 120 million, and a few other countries that are smaller in population but have GDP per capita that are similar to Europe. So it's worth trying to dissect Latin America country by country and seeing exactly what works for each of them. As a general rule, on the Atlantic side, you have rulers in Brazil and in Argentina that tend to be populist majorities that have led the economies through booms and then much more serious busts. So looking here, Lula da Silva and then the current president in Brazil. When you're looking at the Pacific, in particular with Mexico, you have certain companies that have given themselves a bit of a corner on the market, either by positioning themselves very early on or by just simply buying up all of their competitors or pushing everybody else out of the industry, which means that if you're doing business there, sooner or later, for example, in Mexico, you'll have to do business with a company associated with Carlos Slim or feel the impact of his companies on yours. So enough about the geopolitics. Let's start looking at mobile in specific. I think there's a general impression in Latin America that it's a market that's full of low-income feature phone users who, when you're looking at Latin America, you're probably looking back to the J2ME days. In practice, that's really not true. That smartphone penetration in Latin America is up in the range of 67%, and feature phone penetration is smaller and declining. This suggests that when you start looking at making apps for Latin America, even though they certainly won't monetize as well as games for the US or for the UK, it is a smartphone market. It is something that in terms of the product is a lot more similar. And when you start going in a bit more detail in terms of the actual phones that are in use in Latin America, they do tend to have a split that's similar to what you would see in a lot of European countries. You can go through the data here and we can see that Latin America is already the second largest smartphone region and it's the fastest growing. You can see that the potential market today in Latin America is 155 million, which is not too bad. Social mobile, surprisingly, they're very mature, that we have a lot of penetration into mobile social networks in Latin America, that people, if you're going to have, well, obviously, if you're going to have a large smartphone penetration, people are doing it because they want to be viewing Facebook, they want to be checking email, they want to be playing games on their phones. So then you can ask, what do Latinos play on social casino? There's a parallel market to the US and Latin America that in the US we see a large trend that social casino games have converged towards land-based games or land-based style games in their product, that a lot of slot machines that are the most popular are also ones that are played in casinos. We see a similar trend in social casino in Latin America, that there's a range of products that are very particular to individual geographies or some that are spread across. An example that we have here on display is a single-player type of bingo called video bingo, which is extremely popular in casinos in Mexico. It is well known in Brazil, but it's currently outlawed, which means that as we start to see more progression on the regulation front for land-based casinos in Brazil, it's likely a video bingo will be more popularly accepted. But this is a product that's very particular to Latin America. When you look at casinos in particular in Latin America, they see that the revenue per machine is about twice that of slot machines, and we've seen a similar trend in social casino. So then, of course, the obvious question, they have smartphones, they're engaged with the games, they have products that they like that translate over, but do they actually pay? They do, but it's a bit different from what you would see in the US or in Asia, that it's important to take into account the retention curve before people actually do pay, that they're a bit slower to convert, and there are different payment methods that are relevant to Latin America that are completely off the radar for the US and for Europe. So when you're looking at taking a game that will accept credit card payment or will accept the standard payment methods and trying to pitch that to Brazilian players, then you're going to see a pretty obvious problem, because a lot of Brazilian players aren't used to paying with credit card. They have a different bank transfer system that they'll use. In Mexico, it's similar. There are people that are very accustomed to going and making prepaid purchases and then spending those on games or for other purchases online. When you're starting to look at some other geographies, there is higher credit card penetration, but there are also these ancillary payment methods that are important to take into account. So now, you know about Latin America, you have some idea of what is different from the rest of the world that's important to keep in mind in order to be able to make money. So you can ask, okay, this is too much. You think it's a little bit late if you want to start into social casino in Latin America at this point. But in practice, the gaming industry there is still very small in terms of revenue, that there's a lot of penetration, there's a lot of engagement, but in terms of revenue, the companies that are starting to make money there are still small relative to the big US, Asian, or European players. So there's still a lot of room for someone to come in, grow, and expand. And the market itself is still expanding, that we see that in Mexico and Brazil, gaming revenues are increasing as well. Now, that's not to say that there aren't risks involved to it. So obviously, Brazil has had a currency decline that's meant that in terms of euros or dollars, Brazil revenue now is about half as valuable as it was a year ago. Those risks happen. It's something to keep in mind with Latin America, that it's, you're going to have some instability with currencies, some instability with economies, and so it's important to keep a very diversified geographic portfolio in your products. So the conclusion is, it's worth, should you invest in Latin America or not? It's probably worth keeping on your radar. If you're a US-facing company that is purely interested in going and getting as much revenue as possible as quickly as possible, Latin America might not be for you. If you're looking at a smaller opportunity that's easier to penetrate, then Latin America can be very interesting, especially given that it's a growing market. So what about Akamon in particular? Where we fit into this, given that I've said that we are a dominant player in Latin social casino? If we start looking at the research of rankings of social casino companies, we see that at the very top there are the large US-facing companies working with well-established social casino brands. At the time when we had the acquisition, we were ranked number 15th in terms of market share, and we merged with Impress, who already owned a company called DWIP that operates Best Casino, that had 1.6% global market share, we estimate. And so we estimate that moves us up to the 10th largest social casino company in the industry. But okay, we want to look at this when we say all of these companies from the previous slide, the ones that are bigger than us, except for Voya perhaps, are facing the US. So if we're looking at Latin America and looking at appealing to Latino players, that's purely South America, right? Well, in practice, not so much. There's a large penetration of Spanish-speaking users in the US. There's been a large migration of Brazilians into places like Florida, and of course a large migration of Mexicans and other Central Americans into the border states. So we have here a culture that is within the US that's a bit more accustomed to products that are facing Latin America that are not going to catch on to an English-only, US-facing only application quite as easily. And with that, there we go. We can open up to questions.
About monetization in Latin America, compared to United States, do you think it's something you can, is it something you can still get to the same level and same standards, or you depend on something else to monetize it?
It depends how you look at it. If you're looking in terms of profitability of marketing investment, then yes. If you're looking at in terms of rate of conversion, no, probably not. If you're looking in terms of RPPU, in certain segments, yes, but in general, no. It's much lower margin, much lower revenue per player, but it's still something that looking at marketing investment versus the revenue that you see from that, it's still similar returns.
Thank you.
Is iOS more dominant or Android more dominant, or is it different by countries?
It's different by countries, but in every country, Android is more dominant. When you're looking at player penetration, when you start looking at revenue, there are some places where we see that iOS is more on par with Android, just because iOS users have to have a credit card in order to sign into it, and so, well, I'm an Android user, so I'd say that iOS users are suckers anyway, so of course they're going to pay a bit more. But we see in some, geographies that Apple doesn't even operate. So in Argentina, for example, there is no Apple store. So users that are going to be having an iPhone are people who are trying to get something that is very premium. And they might have a harder time paying, but if they do, then they'll monetize at much higher rates. But that's a market where there's much lower volume in terms of conversion anyway.
How's the penetration on tablet?
Tablet, well, from the research data that we see that we presented earlier here, it's in the range of 10%.
All right, so let's have one more round of applause and thank our speaker.